So the January PTR got released and a lot of people are very upset for somewhat good reason. And in this video, I'll be breaking down these upcoming changes and explain in what way they will change the game. From there on out, you can decide for yourself if you're excited or upset over these changes. I strongly recommend you watch this video till the end, because I'll also explain why you actually shouldn't be upset or even care about these changes and show you how little they actually will affect you and your progression. Also, please note that these changes are not in the game yet and are subject to change, but from past experience, the PTR build doesn't really change before going live. Amazon doesn't really react to the community's sentiment about a change and uses the PTR solely to fix out bugs before it's released to the main servers. So you can expect these features staying the way they are right now. Let's start with the main attraction, the mutations. The biggest change or add-on are the expedition mutations, but what are they exactly? So Amazon took the existing dungeons and created multiple new levels of difficulty for these dungeons in the hopes of creating a goal for all their more hardcore oriented players and to simply add more endgame content. These new levels are the so-called mutations. These mutations give endgame replayability for non-endgame expeditions like Dynasty Shipyard and give greater and more competitive replayability to the existing endgame dungeons like the Garden of Genesis and Lazarus Instrumentality. This in itself is a great change, and even if I feel like it's a lazy way of stretching the already existing content, at the end of the day there is more stuff to do and more goals to set for yourself, which is great. The problem starts if you take a closer look at the way this is implemented and the changes it brings along. To compensate for the added difficulty of these mutations, Amazon Game Studio also introduced 25 new Gearscore or gypsum levels. But for me, this is a sad excuse to push people even more into their grind. Instead of increasing the difficulty of the dungeons in a way that people actively have to make specific gear for them and actually dodge and play more thoughtful and skillful instead of holding W and spamming left mouse click, they introduce some bullshit difficulty that scales depending on the gear score you are wearing. Meaning that if you don't have the required gear score, the enemies in those expeditions will not only deal more damage to you, but you will also deal less damage to them, and this has nothing to do with the added defense or damage from those 25 gear scores, since those are very insignificant. You could have the ideal perks and have a better loadout than the other members of your team. If you don't have the required gear score, you'll get absolutely shit on. Now, this doesn't mean that the dungeons aren't more difficult. Even with the required gear score, they actually are quite challenging, but it forces people to grind endless hours to upgrade their equipment. And once again, taking the lazy route of instead introducing a skillful and thought-through system to make their endgame more fun and therefore making replayability smoother, they brought more grind, more dungeon orbs, more cooldown restricted crafting, basically adding all the things that their player base is complaining about. And yes, you heard that right, the mutated expeditions will cost orbs as well, and these orbs are on a weekly cooldown, meaning you can get exactly 2 orbs per week, 1 from crafting and 1 from the faction shop. So if you have a full group of 5 people where everyone has their stone cutting and arcana at max and is ready to grind 10k faction tokens, you get 10 tries and then you wait. But why? Why does it have to be time gated? Why can't I farm as many orbs as I want to run them with my team? Why does my progression have to be artificially slowed? Only Amazon knows. Okay, let's take a closer look at the 25 new Gearscore levels. So along with all these changes, they also introduced a very interesting and good mechanic, but once again very poorly executed. They added the ability to upgrade your gear to 625 gear score, meaning you don't have to drop or craft new 625 gear score items, but you can upgrade your old gear, which is amazing. You could think to yourself, what a great change. Well, kinda. There are a few catches. Firstly, you can only upgrade the gear that is already at 600 gear score. So any gear under 600, even if it's 599, is basically utterly useless for these specific mutations. But that's not the only requirement. Your personal watermark or your gypsum score also has to be 600 with that specific item to even be able to start upgrading the system. But that's not the only requirement. Your personal watermark or your gypsum score also has to be 600 with that specific item to even be able to start upgrading. Meaning that if you didn't grind your ass off to get to 600 gypsum watermark, then this feature is locked to you. Okay, but if you're in the top 3 to 4% that has a full 600 Gearscore set and their gypsum score maxed out, then you're not out of the woods either, because you have a lot more grinding ahead of you. You'll need a lot of the so-called Umbral shards. I'll quickly explain how the process works. You grind mutated dungeon for the most amount of shards, but you also get a smaller amount for crafting 600 Gearscore items or by opening gypsum's casts. To upgrade your gear, you basically take the Umbral shards and you drag them over the equipment you desire to upgrade. In the beginning, the upgrades are pretty cheap. To get your gear from 600 to 601, you spend 1 Umbral shard. To get your gear from 601 to 602, you spend 2. From 602 to 603, you spend 3, and so on. Meaning that from 600 to 603, you need a total of 6 Umbral shards. But this doesn't keep on scaling this way. From level 6, it starts to get more expensive. A detailed list of how many Umbral shards you need for each level is in the description. But long story short, to upgrade one item from 600 Gearscore to 625, you need 9,164 shards. Meaning you need 91,640 shards to upgrade a full set of gear from 600 to 625. But it doesn't stop there, since you probably will need perk-specific gear for the different mutated expeditions, for example Corruption Ward for Dynasty and Ancient Ward for Lazarus, meaning that if you want to do all the endgame mutations, you'll need 3 different gear sets, all up to 625, costing a whopping 274,920 shards. What makes this sound slightly less bad is the highest mutation level gives you 6,000 shards per run. But due to their Gearscore scaling system, you very probably need 625 Gearscore equipment to be able to run all the upper tier mutations. So you'll be grinding scraps in the lower mutated expeditions for quite a while. And let me remind you that you only get 2 orbs per week. This will literally take ages. And this is why a lot of people are quite angry. But now, let me calm down that burning fire and explain why you shouldn't be angry or even care about these changes, because they simply might not affect you at all. First of all, you have to understand that these changes are meant to be a bone for those hardcore PvE players to chew on. It's sort of a prestige thing and not meant for the casual player base. You might tell me that they'll have an advantage in PvP because they will have higher gear score, but if you look at the stats, the changes from 600 to 625 is completely insignificant. You get 1 more attribute point per item, and the perks are increased by less than 1%. For example, cooldown reduction will be reduced by 0.1% faster on a 625 gear score equipment. And yes, a full 625 equipment set might give you 10 more attribute points, but honestly, you would first have to upgrade your PvE set before even starting to think about your PvP set. And that will take you so much time that by then, there will probably be a more efficient way to upgrade your gear. If you wish to look at the stats by yourself, I left a link in the description with the full documentation of the changes from a 595 gear score equipment to a 625 gear score equipment. One thing you could identify as annoying is that this shouldn't have been a priority. Amazon Game Studios shouldn't have worked on a dungeon prestige mode for the hardcore PvE players, but instead focus on something more accessible and enjoyable for their whole playbase. Because let me remind you, New World was supposed to be a hardcore PvP game. And even if I think it's good that they changed that to appeal to a broader audience, I also believe that the bigger part of their player base are the PvPers, and they didn't get anything with this update. And now to the more good news. From the mutations runs I did, I noticed that the drops in those mutations are significantly increased. So if you're a casual player that feels like he has some catching up to do, those mutations won't make it harder for you, but actually easier, since you will have easier access to higher tier gear. And for all my PvPers, stay patient for a little longer. I am convinced that February will be the month for our PvP content. So please, if you're more on the casual side or you simply prefer PvP, these changes almost don't affect you at all. And if you're a hardcore PvE player, then you have a new goal. You have a chance of truly being in the top 0.1% of the player base that has his gear maxed out and that has succeeded in defeating the most hardest parts of the game. And if you reach that landmark, then you have my respect, you crazy dog. I hope this made the upcoming changes clear for you, and I truly wish you a wonderful day. See you next time.